It is now early November 2016, and we are publishing a summary of the remote viewing results for Farsight's Time Cross project for October 2016. Now, here we at the Farsight Institute are using remote viewing to predict major news events a month in advance. So, for the results that I am presenting to you today, the remote viewing was done by 2 remote viewers in September 2016, recorded live on video and then published at the end of that month on YouTube, predicting the major news events for October. Now, the 2 remote viewers are Dick Allgaier and Aziz Brown. So, let's get to it. The targets, which are the focus of perception for our remote viewers, are determined by our automated news analysis process that we maintain in the Time Cross area of our website, updated daily, and which we encourage everyone to follow. For the month of October, there were a few major events. To determine which are the most significant events, we count story links on the main web pages of CNN, the international and U.S. versions, the New York Times, and the BBC. First, the most heavily covered single-item news story of the month was the arrival of Hurricane Matthew on the east coast of the United States. Now, the total number of links to related stories for Hurricane Matthew was 146. Now, in terms of the second most covered news event, it was the Middle East wars of Iraq and Syria. Now, we have always been a bit concerned about including the Middle East wars in our project, since they seem to be ongoing, and in that sense, they sort of are predictable. But as it has turned out so far, the developments of the wars have been highly varied and quite unpredictable from our remote viewing perspective, and our remote viewing results have been as surprising to us as to many others. When we began our Time Cross project in May 2016, the Middle East wars were hardly visible as major news items. Then, in August, the war in Syria flared up tremendously. For example, for the month of August, some of our remote viewing results focused on the new use of the Russian Caliber hypersonic cruise missile, and we even obtained detailed video footage from the Russian Ministry of Defense that shows what that kind of attack looks like, and it remarkably matched our remote viewing data. And then, in September, the Middle East war coverage shifted to negotiations between Russia and the United States, and again our remote viewing results followed that closely. And now for October, we were totally expecting Syria to continue burning up the news coverage based on what happened in August and September. But this did not happen as news shifted dramatically to Mosul, Iraq in mid-October. And as you will soon see in this video, our remote viewing results reflect this shift amazingly well. When this began on October 15th, we started to isolate the news stories that focused only on Iraq from the rest of the Middle East wars in our news analysis. However, while the news coverage was about Mosul, the fighting in Iraq was not directly centered in Mosul in October. The fighting was in the approach to Mosul. The fight within Mosul did not begin in earnest until November. In general, the news coverage for October was about Mosul and the build-up to the fight to retake the city from ISIS. In terms of activity, there was fighting in the town surrounding Mosul, and there were some war-related explosive events within Mosul itself, but no major fighting within the city limits. In terms of the news coverage, the total number of links to the Middle East war coverage for the month of October for both Syria and Iraq was 154, with 115 of those links going solely to Mosul, Iraq. So, according to the remote viewing theory being tested in this experiment, the remote viewing results for October should focus on Hurricane Matthew and the struggle involving Mosul, Iraq. Hillary Clinton's email scandal was third, and I will have more to say about that and a different and very surprising news story later in this presentation. So let's start with Hurricane Matthew, the biggest single-item news story of the month of October. Now, in September, Dick Allgaier did 2 remote viewing sessions for this October event month, and his first session was a detailed description of the effects of Hurricane Matthew with respect to a U.S. coastal city. When remote viewing, the remote viewer attempts to focus on some specific place. So when covering something as widespread as a hurricane, it is natural for remote viewers to find themselves looking at a particularly interesting spot that exemplifies the activity associated with the event. In Dick's case, he clearly described a coastal city as evidenced by descriptions of a waterfront, nearby piers, boats, and a large body of water. He also focused on cloud dynamics in his session, stuff that is in the air, stuff you could see. Crucially, he reported a widespread power outage, a state of emergency, an effort to evacuate certain areas, lights out, the disruption of cell phone service, and lots of people with edgy emotions. The people were wondering how long this will last. They were not panicked, but concerned. Some people were trapped in elevators due to the power outage. Satellite communications were also disrupted. All of this perfectly matched what actually happened during the United States encounter with Hurricane Matthew. Indeed, news reports stated that over 1 million people were without power during the hurricane. Now, Aziz Brown did 2 sessions for the event month of October, and I have to admit that going into the month, I had no idea what those sessions could possibly relate to. I know he is a great remote viewer, so I knew he would get it right, but the sessions themselves just did not initially make sense to me. The sessions described a large urban area in an arid or brownish environment with low-level brown buildings, and the urban area had a large body of dirty or muddy water running through the center of it, a river. There was a large area of green foliage to the north, and in his second session, there was a heavily forested area as well, making me initially think that this was a different city entirely when compared with his first session. None of this matched Aleppo, Syria, which dominated the previous months of August and September. Aleppo has no river running through the center of it, and there is no heavily forested area in Aleppo, although there are a few scattered spots with some trees. In general, Aziz's sessions certainly did not seem to describe anything happening in Syria, so when the month of October began, I and probably lots of other people were puzzled as to where this could be. And in terms of activities, Aziz reported one building in his first session that seemed to experience an explosion and extensive fire. In his second session, a building adjacent to or within a forested area had an explosion in an upper floor. Again, none of this suggested major war activity of the type we were used to seeing during the months of August and September in Syria. But as it turned out, Aziz's sessions perfectly described Mosul, Iraq during the month of October. You see, Mosul is a major urban area in a brown, arid environment, and it has a major river that runs right through the center of the city that exactly matches Aziz's description of the city and its river. Aziz reported that the water in the river is either dirty or muddy, which is a match. And in the northern part of the city, there is an extensive area of green foliage. Now, with respect to Aziz's second session, Mosul also contains a heavily forested area. The trees are very tall, taller than the surrounding buildings, as can be seen by the shadows from the trees and buildings as captured by Google Earth. Only a few of the buildings are within the forested area. Finally, Aziz reports 2 buildings that experienced destructive events. Nowhere does he report an invasion or major wartime activities, and that perfectly matches what was happening on the ground in Mosul during the month of October, which is very different from what we are now seeing in Mosul during November. So, in terms of Hurricane Matthew and Mosul, Iraq, our remote viewing results do appear to match what actually happened in October. Those were the big events in terms of news coverage, and the remote viewing results were clear hits. And they also were clear in terms of geographic and event details. But a couple of other things came across in the remote viewing results for October that are not as clear. In his second session for the event month of October, Dick Allgaier reports what appears to be complex economic and internet-related activities that have many people worried. He describes digital information being transmitted over a complex global network, concerned people watching large flat panel screens showing troublesome economic data, and he describes the concept of an economic system eating itself. Such a thing was not one of the top stories for the month. However, something like that did happen, and it was reported in our covered news outlets. On October 21st, there was a coordinated series of worldwide cyber attacks that darkened much of the internet for many hours. Now, the attacks focused on some of the largest businesses that had global internet reaches. It was more than a simple troubling event caused by a teenage hacker. It was big and very worrisome, but the total number of news links in our covered news sources was only 9. This is the third time in our project that lower-ranked news items were picked up by our remote viewers. The first was the resignation of David Cameron as Prime Minister of Great Britain in July 2016, and the second was the Wells Fargo bank scandal in September 2016. Our remote viewers clearly appear to have described those events. The viewers have always gotten the biggest news stories, but these lower-ranked stories that seem to be included in our results are a bit puzzling. They suggest that our targeting process that involves an automated news analysis is not perfect in limiting the focus of the attention of the remote viewers to only the top-ranked news stories. It does seem to work well, just not perfectly. The viewers are doing their sessions with the intent of describing the most important news events of a given month, a month in advance, and it appears that the viewer's intent is playing an unexpected and unanticipated role in some of the targeting on relatively rare occasions. Dick Allgaier also included a perception of a candidate or leader who stumbled, possibly Hillary Clinton. Now, this did not happen in a physical sense in October, but metaphorically this did happen as her email scandal blew up to new proportions when the FBI temporarily reopened the case 10 days before the election. Now, I'm not sure what to make of that, although with remote viewing, sometimes these things happen. Remember, remote viewers are people, not robots. And as people, they are going to be attracted to certain things when they remote view, and unexpected things will sometimes happen when they do their best to understand their perceptions. We can control most of this with our tasking procedures, but not everything, which makes this project even a bit more fun, since the unexpected is often fun almost by definition. So, our Time Cross project is successfully reporting the major news stories to you a month in advance each month, but it also appears on rare occasions to be throwing in a few relatively minor stories into the mix that may indeed be very important in the long run, but which may not be as heavily covered in our included news venues. This is an experiment, and we want to continue to see how this experiment, as it is currently structured, pans out after a long period of trials. So far, we have not reported any major news events that did not actually happen, and nearly all of the events that we have reported have been the top-ranked news stories of each month. So, together with a few unexpected surprises, we continue to bring you tomorrow's news today, and quite accurately. Remember that this is a public experiment, and we are learning along with everyone else. The Time Cross project is turning out to be hugely successful and tremendously interesting, filled with new surprises each month. So please continue to watch the monthly results for Farsight's Time Cross project. And I must continue to mention that we are offering our Time Cross project free to the public as a way of demonstrating the reality and potential of remote viewing. But it costs us a few $1,000s each month to do this. So for us to continue, we need your help by watching our mysteries projects. It is the only thing that pays the bills. So go to our website to see information about those projects that include remote viewing investigations into the 9/11 events, the assassinations of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King, the psychology of Adolf Hitler, and some amazing explorations into UFOs and extraterrestrial life. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channels. We have 2 YouTube channels, one for the science stuff, such as our Time Cross project, which is the FarsightPress channel, and the other for our Farsight video vlogs, which is the FarsightPrime channel, that contains information about remote viewing, things that we are doing next, training activities, clips from the Farsight movie, and more. The 2 YouTube channels have related but separate and unique content, so please remember to subscribe to both of our YouTube channels so you can closely follow our activities. Stay ahead of the curve. Let the mainstream fade in the dust. Be there now.